Good afternoon, wherever you are, or good morning, depending on if you're international. Today, we have a wonderful panel from across the industry to talk about supporting behavioral health, looking at addiction, substance misuse, and mental health across the hospitality industry, and really looking for strategies and ways forward of where we want to go with this. I can tell you, I'm the Dean of Social Work at the Tulane School of Social Work here in New Orleans. We have a huge hospitality industry. It's the best city in the world. And so, not only are we going to blend in talking about some of the impacts of COVID, this presentation was put together and put in for TAILS long before COVID came about. It's only exacerbated these issues. And so we're going to speak to that, but also speak to the broader reach of where we should go in the industry, what we can and should do, and really want to invite questions from the audience to each one of the panel members. And I'm actually humbled to be among this group. These are some stars across the industry, and I'm going to have each one of them introduce themselves and give a brief introduction, and then we'll get right into things as we go forward. So I don't know how other people's screens are, if this is like Zoom where people dance around on the screen, but Laura's up in my right. So I'm going to have Laura introduce herself and tell us a little bit about her background.
Yeah, for sure. So my name is Laura Green. I am out of Chicago, Illinois. I am a hospitality, I guess people have been using the term veteran now, so that makes me feel great. No kidding. But I've been in the industry for about coming up on 20 years, being more in a craft bartender sense for the last decade. But I'm also a licensed professional counselor. I decided about 7 years or so ago that this wasn't really the healthiest industry, and I didn't feel like I was thriving. So I started thinking about other things I wanted to do, went back to school to be a therapist. And by the time I graduated, I realized that I had developed a skill set and a tool set to actually start addressing the issues within the industry that I loved, but was problematic to be in. So I currently work for a distributor of fine wine and spirits here in the Midwest called Winebow. It grants me access to the community that I love so much and markets outside of my Chicago market. And I'm able to continue researching and teaching about mental health and working with different bars and restaurants and brands of what they can do to improve the mental health and well-being of the individuals who are working for them. So I started a company called Healthy Pour, and yeah, a lot more from Healthy Pour to come, but that's me. It's what I do.
Cool. Thank you, Laura. Jeffrey, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah. Hey, my name's Jeff Goldring. I'm living in New Orleans right now. I am an owner and director of the Sazerac Company, which is the largest distiller in North America. I'm also an owner and director of Crescent Crown Distributing, which is a beer distributor that operates in Arizona, southeastern Louisiana, and the Panhandle of Florida. And I've worked in this industry, all my life. My family has been in this business either as a distributor, as a manufacturer, since the late 1800s. So that gives us about 125 years in the business. But I think that, the thing that makes me most qualified to be, on this panel and here today is that I'm a man in long-term recovery, which means that I haven't had a drink or a drug in a little over 19 years. And, I think we'll probably get into it more later, but, growing, up in the business, I was around alcohol all my life. I didn't listen to maybe all the warnings and signs. And so I ended up, drinking enough for a few lifetimes. But now I've, gotten into recovery. I think so. My message is that, it can work. I can still work in this business and be sober.
Cool. Thank you, Jeffrey. That's awesome. Steve.
Hey there, my name's Steve Palmer. I am the managing partner of the Indigo Road Hospitality Group. We are based in Charleston, South Carolina. We own and operate over 20 hotels and restaurants in the Southeast. I too, like Jeffrey, went to rehab through an intervention of a restaurant owner that I was working for 19 years ago, and gratefully have not had a drink since. In 2016, a dear friend and chef who worked for us, Ben Murray, committed suicide while opening a restaurant with us. And the real tragedy for us was that we didn't even know Ben was suffering. We had no idea. He'd been in and out of detox 6 different times, and work, and the sort of question that we had to ask ourselves was, what was it about our environment that Ben didn't feel like he could reach out and ask for help? So we started Ben's Friends, which is a weekly support group run by sober people in the industry for sober people or people seeking sobriety. And I'm happy to say that we're currently in 14 cities now. Our goal is 50 states. We have daily Zoom meetings that are national at bensfriendshope.com. And really, as much as my day job running multiple restaurants in multiple states is my passion, helping other people achieve sobriety and stay in the industry is easily my bigger passion. So happy to be here today. Thank you.
Thanks. Like I said, we've got rock stars here across the industry that all bring different backgrounds. Again, every single one of them, when we reached out to join the panel, jumped on this opportunity to talk about something where there's a lot of stigma, not only in hospitality industry, but also just across the general society, and talking about these issues. And we're hoping by bringing this up and discussing that this will keep a conversation going beyond this and lead to some other things, which we'll talk about later. Looks like Ashley's celebrating 4 years in sobriety in June. Congratulations. She joined us in seeing the panel. So congratulations. And if you have questions, I'm not very good. I've been Zooming for many, many months now. So I'll try to look over, and if I miss questions, I'll get to them. But the one thing that I want to pose to the group here is, how do you see mental health and substance misuse or addiction? How does this work in the industry? What are y'all seeing? I can tell you, my family owned restaurants growing up. I have a father who's in sobriety for probably, I'm going to say, over 30 plus years. Knew about it when I was a young person. So he wasn't in hospitality industry. But again, you can see addiction touches all families, everybody on this call, as well as many other folks sort of dialing in here today. And so I really want to think about, what does this look like currently, or how is this manifesting across all of your sort of lines in the industries, and what are you seeing, and what's happening out there?
Well, I'll jump in. I mean, and stating I'm the optimist and my glass is always half full. I really think in the last 4 years, 5 years, we're having this conversation about mental health, and I'm so grateful for it. I'm sure Jeffrey would agree. When I got sober 19 years ago, I was the general manager of a restaurant and a sommelier, and it was sort of like, how's that going to work? And even within the walls of traditional recovery, the message was, you're probably going to need to get out of the business because you're just not going to be able to stay sober. And thankfully, and I said this the other day, really the Anthony Bourdain suicide, I think, at least for Ben's Friends, we were in 1 or 2 cities and then we were in 10. I think it really propelled the conversation forward. And as much as statistically, look, addiction's always going to win. And so we could throw a lot of data, but I'm happy to say that there is a conversation. People, even during COVID, Mickey Bax and I, my co-founder, we've been shocked at the amount of people that are getting sober on Zoom in Ben's Friends. We have about 50 people a day on our Zoom call, and more people, 1 week of sobriety, 10 days of sobriety. So we have a long way to go, but I feel like this conversation is now, even people that don't identify within our restaurants, when I walk through, hey, how's Ben's Friends going? Hey, I think it's really great what you're doing. So that for me has been really the cultural shift, where it's not just people that think they have an issue. Everybody is supportive of mental health now. So we have a long way to go, but I feel like our industry is addressing it in a way that we never have before.
I think that's great. And you touched on something that's very important, that there was a lot of doom and gloom that came out with COVID and what was going to happen to meetings, what was going to happen to recovery and mental health. We know from the data, and I've spoke on this a lot, we know that during any disaster, post-disaster, mental health increases, high relapse rates. We do have all of that, as well as new individuals developing behavioral health issues. But what we're seeing is people being able to access care, or at least meetings where they never were before, right? You get off of work, you go somewhere, where my office is not too far from the French Quarter. There's not a lot of meetings after people get off their shifts that are accessible. I mean, that in a city like New Orleans, which is a problem. If you get off shift, everyone may be drinking or drugging or whatever after work, or going out partying. Where are you going to go if you're in recovery? How do you fit into that mix? And so I think what you're describing, Steve, is it's happening through Zoom, and people are getting past that technology gap. That how can we create that personal connection? And once you've been on 10 Zooms, we've all been in thousands of Zooms, I'm sure at this point, the technology just sort of goes in the background and you create these personal interactions. So I'm glad you brought that up. I think that's going to be very helpful in the future, even we're in a post-COVID world, of being able to access services and interventions. So I'm glad you brought that up. So
Yeah.
what have you seen?
Well, what I see a lot within, I'm echoing. There we go. What I see within our industry in terms of substance use, because I'm always trying to look sort of, down the stream to see why people are falling in, like what's happening there. So the thing that happens is that alcohol and other substances we wear a lot of hats with them. They have a lot of streams within our lives. For example, I'm a bartender by trade. I use alcohol as a educational tool. I use it as a medium to create art. I use it as a way to connect with my colleagues and my friends. Like, there's a social aspect to it, but also within that, it's a coping mechanism, and it's an easily accessible coping mechanism. You have a stressful shift. You are constantly being dehumanized by guests or even the organization that you work for. We don't have the emotional tools, and we're not taught the emotional tools to create boundaries or to sort of understand how we're feeling and why. So we just stifle stuff. And then post shift, we go out and start drinking. And then none of these stressful events are really addressed, and it becomes maladaptive. Layer on top of that alcohol consumption is something that's normalized and celebrated. I can't tell you how many shifts I've walked into where the narrative of the room is like, wow, everyone was so wasted last night. That was so much fun. And we normalize and celebrate that. Even how we pour each other shots and give each other drinks, right? Like, I can walk into a bar and there's a shot waiting for me, and it's an expression of love. But the reality is that it's poison. That's poison in front of me, So the relationship that we have with alcohol is very muddy. And so then it makes it hard to understand when that relationship becomes problematic, especially when it is so heavily celebrated. So that's, I think, at one of the most foundational levels is education, not just around the spirits that we're drinking, like spirits education, how to use it, how to apply it to our work, but also understanding why are we consuming, increasing individuals, emotional intelligence to understand why they're consuming and when. I'm having a flood of memories of all the times that, we've ducked behind a bar and taken a shot to sort of take the stress off a little bit, or, drank behind the bar, during a busy rush or whatever, all of these different things. And so then you're building camaraderie alongside of a maladaptive coping mechanism. And so those things get muddy as well. And that's how we kind of find ourselves in these situations. That was a lot, but yeah.
Yeah, I've got a few comments too. You know, I mean, growing up in the business, you know, from a supplier and manufacturer standpoint, you know, I don't think there's ever been a lot of stuff that they've really, you know, done to get employees help, right? The message on all the advertisements is, you know, here's our product, drink responsibly, or you know, or if there is a employee with an issue, they just send them to HR, the employee assistance program, and you know, there hasn't been a lot of done a lot of like education, and I think that's still, you know, what's important, because there is that stigma out there of alcoholism and drug addiction, and it's hard to own that, right? And so I think, you know, for me, the biggest thing I can do, you know, to help people is advocacy work. You know, get out and tell my story, and the fact that, you know, I you know, got sober working in the industry. I took some time off. I'm able to come, you know, back to it. That may or may not work for, you know, for other people. And then, you know, what I've seen too, and maybe we'll get into this later, some trends is, I think, you know, giving people other options of things to drink, right? I see a lot of more and more mocktails showing up on restaurant, you know, drink lists. And from that standpoint, the restaurants can charge you know, the same thing for a mocktail as they would charge for an alcoholic beverages. And so the margins are great, you know, for them too. So when
you know, Jeff, I say that all the time. You know, I don't, as a sober person, charge me 10 or $11, just make it interesting. And it also helps. And I've been really grateful that our industry, like any legit restaurant these days, for the most part, has we like spirit free over mocktail, but, you know, or people say soft cocktails. But you know, I am grateful for it because it kind of removes some of that social stigma. You know, now I've got a drink in front of me, right, other than a Diet Coke or sparkling water. And I don't care what it costs. And especially when it's thoughtful and made by bartenders that are really engaged in it. It's a win-win, I think. It really is.
No, I'm glad you both bring that up. The university, as you know, we've embraced having spirit-free mocktails, whatever the latest, at alumni and donor events. So there are options. So you are being inclusive, and it doesn't matter if it's a bar or a restaurant. It's that idea of being part of a crowd. I think Lucinda typed in something about, you know, the shot culture has to end. You know, I don't want shots, you know, and people are offended when I don't take them. Again, that is a culture shift, that you could have a spirit-free cocktail and still enjoy that camaraderie you have with your shift and what you're doing, but also do it in a way that's comfortable, that's inclusive for all. And I think Jeff brought up a great point. This doesn't take much for the industry to shift on this. That's the thing that I don't want to ever go into an industry that is not my industry and say, oh, well, just do this, and it's going to hit the bottom line. All the things that we're talking about actually are going to improve the industry, but also not cost the industry the cost that we have now. The mocktails, Jeffrey's right. You can actually, mocktails and spirit-free cocktails most of the time cost more than your standard just well drink. Or something like that. So it is a bottom line, and you have a low cost in, but a high cost out. But also you're bringing people into your establishment that would have probably said, "Oh, I'll have an iced tea," or "I will have something like that," because they can't order a drink because they're maybe in sobriety. So I think it's a way to create inclusivity, but also to help the restaurants develop another revenue stream. Now I sound like I'm in the industry, but that was good. But it is very true. That's what I want to think about, this being additive as our conversation goes, because I think a lot of owners and groups out there were like, no, if we bring that in, that's going to cost us all this money. Mm-hmm. And I think as we progress through our conversation, it's actually going to create your workforce and keep your bottom line the same or higher and low cost in. I think Laura said something earlier. We were talking right before in the green room. Can you share about the turnover rates? And this again fits in with that.
For sure. And I'll also add, before I get into the turnover rates, the piece about providing interesting drinks that might resemble a cocktail without alcohol in it, that's hospitality. And something that I think that we get away from, and what we've really lost sight of within our industry, is providing hospitality. Yes, we want to be cognizant of, cost of goods and what our profit margins are looking like and what our labor costs are and this and that and this and that. But really at the end of the day, what we're here to do is provide hospitality, and provide hospitality safely for the people who are working within these bars and restaurants or hotels or wherever. But in 2019, the Bureau of Labor Statistics found that the turnover rate for the hospitality industry is something like 74%. But HR experts say that a healthy turnover rate is 10 to 15%. So we have a problem within our industry where this sort of transient nature is accepted. And that leads to a lot of issues, because we're not seeing employee support, because ownership is saying, well, why are we going to invest in our employees when they're just going to leave us anyway? But then people who are working within these bars and restaurants and different organizations are saying, well, why am I going to really care about this place? They don't take care of me anyway. So it's this nasty little cycle, when the reality is the cost of turnover is so high. We're not just talking about like training cocktails or training hours or the meals for tastings or anything like that. We're talking about loss of productivity. We're talking about loss of group cohesion, being understaffed. There's overtime costs. If you're understaffed behind the bar and somebody wants another cocktail and they're like that third of the way down when you're supposed to re-ask, and you might miss that. And then that person's like, I'll just go to the next bar anyway. And you lose that reorder. So the costs of turnover are so much more beyond just what those training costs are. Sometimes upwards towards like 20, 25% of what that annual salary would look like. So if we're looking at like 74% of turnover, but the cost of the turnover is 20 to 25% of what that annual salary will look like, that's a huge amount of money that can be reinvested into more training opportunities, health insurance, mental health resources, like gym memberships, so much higher salaries, higher wages for the back of house. So there's so much potential. If we can eliminate turnover, or at least let's even say take it down 25% to 50%, think of how much more money restaurants will have. So, Patrick, to your point, like that cultural shift is really important on how we even approach how we engage with our employees and how employees engage with the organization.
No, I think it's well put. Steve, how does this manifest, or how have you seen this manifest at Indigo and other? I mean, you've been in the industry a long, long time. How have you seen this toll taken on the industry, and obviously the business impact, but everything that we're discussing?
It's interesting. We, in conjunction with Ben's Friends, we as a company started offering free mental health. So if you want to go see a counselor or a therapist, we'll pay for it, no questions asked. We also removed about 3 years ago the time-honored shift drink. We just said, you know what, we're just not. What you do outside of our four walls, and by the way, being sober doesn't mean you're anti-alcohol. You're anti-addiction, right? I sell alcohol every night. But we as a group said, let's keep our environment as healthy as possible. And by removing the shift drink, so our turnover is down in the 40% range, and it's down 25% since we enacted all of these things. And we are just, it is our goal, our endeavor, our mission to have a healthier workplace. And by simply removing the shot from the work, we've sent a message. It's subtle. Again, I always say I'm not on a moral crusade. Alcohol is not bad. It was bad for me. And so by doing these little things, we're attracting a better class of employee. And we've had employees say, because sometimes a big restaurant group can be seen as a negative. But we have a lot of people that say, I want to work in a professional environment. This is my craft. This is my trade. I want to work somewhere where people are taking it seriously. And so, it's fun. We talk about turnover and the data, and we talk about this all the time. And we have found unilaterally that once we've engaged proactively in mental health practices, our turnover has gone down.
And so do you think if you were to recommend to other groups, because we had Scott actually posted a comment in there about tools to recognize it, how do you get owners on board? Can you describe, that is a huge shift. You're not hearing that from most restaurant groups, and people who have heard me speak. My belief system is every restaurant group should have more than one, but I'll start out small. One social work practitioner that can serve as that pivotal person to deal with mental health and addiction for employee wellness. That's really what I'd like to see. You would need more than that, but I think it's a start. How are you able to do that, Steve? That's not the norm in the industry, and I see everybody giving you the thumbs up. It's pretty phenomenal. How did that work?
It's interesting, and Jeffrey may have thoughts on this too. When I first got sober, and even as an owner, initially I never wanted to sort of project my sobriety on my company. I always was very sort of sensitive about, like, look, this is my journey. I'm not against alcohol. My wife likes pink champagne. Again, being sober doesn't mean that you're just repelled against the idea of alcohol. But what I realized is the more that I was open and transparent about my journey, the more people around me started embracing it. And again, I think it's important, not just people that may or may not have an issue, not just people that may or may not be questioning their own drinking, but everyone said, yes, mental health, look, our friends are dying. Addiction, there's no one you're going to meet that addiction hasn't touched, right? And most of it, when I say touched, has been a very negative experience. And what I found was that there was this whole audience of people that want to embrace mental health, even if they don't particularly themselves feel like they're having issues. They care about their coworkers. They're watching their coworkers OD. We know that the opioid crisis is just, in the last decade, just hyperdrived overdoses at a level we've never seen before. So I was really pleasantly surprised at the openness at which people embraced it. And to Scott's question more, shameless plug, the best watchdog you can have is the Ben's Friends in your city. So there's that. But there's also things like Chefs with Issues. Kat Kinsman, who most of us know, started a website where it's an online portal, and there's thousands of people on that just having an open chat about what they're doing. There's another program started by a restaurateur in California called I've Got Your Back, which creates an ecosystem within your restaurant where you can communicate non-verbally to your employees. I'm depressed today. I need an extra hug. I'm having a hard time. So there are tools out there, and I can't recommend them enough. But really, every city, what I love most of all, and I feel like I'm talking too much, is now, so I'll pick Charleston. Every restaurant owner in the city now knows if one of their employees is having a hard time, to come to Ben's Friends, to call one of us, that we're going to be there. And and we get calls from chef owners, hey, I'm sending one of my employees to you. Our meeting meets on Sunday. So it's establishing those systems. Look, in every city, the restaurant industry is a tight-knit community, right? Once you open a Ben's Friends or you get Chefs with Issues out, pretty quickly it spreads around town and everybody kind of knows, hey, this is a resource. So there's so many resources out there. It's just a matter of making them more public.
I think, Steve, you hit the nail on the head. And I think Jeffrey's journey is phenomenal. He's in an industry that when Jeffrey speaks, like he said earlier, he's a phenomenal advocate, right? He's not out there saying, hey, this is bad, this is bad. He's talking about it within the cocktail culture. This is the culture he grew up in. And I think being successful, and I hate to use the term role models, because he'll give me stuff about this later, but I think showing how you can be in recovery and successfully in recovery, having a family business that's in the industry, but also embracing that serves as a role model for people that said, I can't do this. Because you would think, well, I can't, just like you were thinking, Steve, well, how do I go back into my business that I love? Jeffrey, you and I talked about this. Can you share a little bit about that journey and what the difficulties and how you come out on top and are a great advocate?
Yeah. And so, look, I was, growing up in a family business that revolves around alcohol, there was warnings from my parents, right, from the time that before I could, drive and before I started working in the industry, that they said, look, this is you work in a business, that involves alcohol. I mean, you can't get a felony, you can't, drink and drive. And, the thing was, I didn't really, listen. And, and growing up in New Orleans, there was a lot of crawfish boils and beer. And, later I got into more hard alcohol and drugs. And for a long time, I think I was really good at, compartmentalizing the different parts of my life. And I was pretty professional at work, and I showed up, in a coat and tie, and I exercised, and, I put on a really good face, and things looked really good. But then when I wasn't working, I was dealing with this, I was drinking and using drugs. And everybody knows that it's a progressive illness. And at some point, towards the end, the two crossed over. And I laugh about it now, but, people were going to my dad and saying, we think Jeff has a problem. And I would be like, oh, if they really think I have a problem and they care, they should talk to me. And so it was a problem. And I had to go to treatment. I heard things like, if you hang out at a barbershop, you're going to get a haircut. And I didn't know if I could, go back to, working in the family business or what I was going to do. And I heard a man tell his story one evening, and he, worked in a brewery. And, he had to go back to work to support his family. That was the only thing that he knew how to, do. And the message, from him was that, like, if we take care of ourselves, whether it's working a 12-step program or whatever we need to do to take care of ourselves, for me, it's a 12-step program, that we can go anywhere and do, anything. And so, I think the minute that, that I really surrendered to the fact that I had a problem and got help, I did take some time off of the business. But then over time, I was able to get back into the business. And what I realized was that I had to rearrange some of the priorities in my life, because what I learned growing up was that the business was the most important thing. But what I learned, that if I want to work in the business, that the most important thing is, like, taking care of myself. And then I'll see if the work kind of, fits back in. And so that's what I did. And I remember the day I was with my dad driving in a car, and he said, you really think you can go back to work in this business? And I said, yeah, I think I can take care of myself. I can know what I need to do. And I can do it. And so, look, I'm fortunate enough today that, as an owner and director, look, I grew up working on the front lines of the business, doing wine tastings, doing liquor tastings, bar promotions, carrying a sales bag. But today, as a big picture, more strategic guy, I don't have to be in those, situations. I don't have to taste, the bourbon. There's other people, that can do those things. Not to say that, like, I'm around it all the time, and I look and I say, boy, it still looks enticing, right? When they put those high-end whiskeys in front of me, it still looks good, but I know that's not, for me today. And the other thing I think, and Steve touched on this as he was talking about what goes on in his companies. It's about also having the right corporate culture, and that's what I wish I could say that I did it, but I'm not doing a lot of the hiring and firing today. But our CEO, has created a corporate culture that doesn't evolve around drinking. I mean, it revolves around being professional in a business setting, winning, and a business first kind of thing. And I see, I've grown up in this business, so I've seen how other, businesses operate. And look, every corporate culture is different, but there's certainly more that have drinking cultures. And I would say ours is more of a business culture, win first, have fun, kind of culture.
No, I think, Jeffrey, I'm back with that'll stop. We'll see. I think any business, and I think we just assume it's hospitality because there is alcohol and there is issues. However, I do not know any business, no matter what you're in, where you can have an active addiction or untreated mental health issues and be that successful professional that you want to be. And I think all of you have described this, getting healthy as yourself as a starting point. The business is always going to be there. And if you want to be a professional in that business, it starts with you, because it doesn't matter. Yes, it is, for some folks, the triggers and the cues of being around alcohol and everything are going to be overwhelming, especially when you just start your recovery journey. And it is a process as it's been described. But I think figuring out how you can be a professional, and we've got, that's one of the reasons everyone's on this panel, to show that this is a professional business. It should be a professional business, and how you get successful is working on yourself like you would. If you want to be a great manager, get manager training, to be as good as you can in that field. And so I think you all shared really great points. And I'm curious to hear what Laura has to say kind of on this same thread as well, because I see you shaking your head a lot, and I think you have some great things to say as well.
Well, there's a lot to address within our industry. And I describe it as like a knot, when you go into like a sewing kit and there's a knot of thread and you start working through it. And at first it's really terrible, but then once you start working your way, it starts to come apart, and then you have your clean lines that you can really start using to make something. But in terms of the workplace and, mental health implications there and substance use, we do definitely want to see people working on themselves, and especially people in leadership, especially people in management, because what we find a lot of the time is that people move into management from, let's say, an hourly position, and they don't have that manager training, and they don't have that kind of manager mentorship. So many folks, I was having a conversation with a bartender in Chicago, and actually this is the conversation that put me more towards an organizational moving more into an organizational and leadership framework within my work, that, I think his bar had closed, and I was like, what's next for you? And he's like, I don't think I want to be a manager. It's echoey. Anyway, he was like, I don't think I want to be a manager because I don't think I'm ready to manage other people. He's like, I make a good cocktail, but I don't think that I have those management skills. And it was such a self-aware thing to say, because I think, folks watching at home, we know that if you're a manager or you have a manager, I was never trained as a manager. I was trained as a therapist, and I took those skills and inserted that into my management. However, if we aren't managing people and we're not managing the culture of our spaces, it makes it too easy to already take a susceptible population and put them at higher risk. And that includes things like addressing racism and bias in the workplace, sexism, harassment, all of these things that create stress that then push people towards having to cope with substances like alcohol. It's all intertwined. So I think leadership and management training is essential, and managers and leaders have to be healthy with their mental health so that they can create and foster an environment in which people can thrive.
No, I think that's right. Creating, as Steve brought up earlier, creating that culture. And so I think as we've laid the groundwork to kind of what we're expecting, what we're seeing, I'm going to add on that other layer that we brought up earlier. How has the current pandemic shifted any of these things we've been discussing and what you're seeing across? Obviously, then the obvious things, we're all physically distancing. Restaurants, as we know, literally, I can tell you in New Orleans, 12 hours, somebody went from having a position to being basically out of work within 12 hours, whether it was in the music business or whether it was in hospitality industry. You know, a lot of us are dealing with the general anxiety of a pandemic and all the stressors that go along with it. Also imagine being from the industry and you are trying to figure out where you're going to live, how you're going to pay rent, and you're out of work with no end in sight. How have y'all seen that playing out from your vantage points?
Well, I think the again, Mr. Optimism over here. I mean, what we've seen. So we immediately pivoted and said, okay, all of our in-person Ben's Friends meetings will switch to Zoom, and then we layered on a national meeting. So every day of the week, a different city hosts the Ben's Friends meeting, and really the pleasant surprise has been just the amount of people on the Zoom every day. But there are people that have never physically been to a Ben's Friends meeting that are finding Ben's Friends online. There are people from Petaluma, California, Chicago, Canada. And so it's really shown me just how really engaged we are in mental health right now. And what's shocking, I mean, I know for me, when I was drinking and drugging, a pandemic would have been the excuse to crawl into the bottom of a bottle and, hey, call me when it's over and let me know. And we have so many people that are getting sober virtually on Zoom, which to me is so powerful because, you know, in the recovery community, sort of the impetus of getting sober is that you're not going to do it alone, right? The first word in the 12 steps is we. And so there's this idea that you need human connection to get sober, and seeing it happen virtually has been one of the true blessings of my life. So while externally our circumstances suck right now, I think it speaks to just how awesome hospitality people are to begin with, but B, because look, we have a disease that tells us we don't have a disease, right? Cancer patients are not walking around saying, I don't have cancer, but there are alcoholics, millions, walking around saying, I'm fine. Well, layer in a pandemic, and now you just have another excuse to avoid the fact that you have a disease that tells you don't have a disease. So to see people addressing it in this environment, it's really, really powerful.
Jeffrey or Laura?
Yeah, I'll add to that. It's interesting because I've also seen when the pandemic first started to really take over and that sort of collective trauma started setting in, I got really concerned for a lot of people. I was like, oh my gosh, if they're not working, like there's already a bartender identity that people hold very near and dear, and it often limits people from exploring other identities within their life, like sister, brother, neighbor, whatever, bartender. I started getting really concerned for people, and I still am. I should really drive that home. I still am, especially going into, like, I'm in Chicago, so going into the winter months, we're going to lose our patios. You know, I think other restaurants are going to start closing. So I have a lot of concerns there, but I've also seen a lot of people thrive outside of the bars and restaurants since they haven't been going to work. It gives them time to really, you know, sit down with themselves, to explore other ways to cope, to kind of figure out what those triggers are for them. You know, the removal of the culture, like removing themselves from the culture, has actually been really fantastic for them. You know, that also concerns me because I don't want to lose an entire workforce of individuals who love this industry because it is harmful to them. So the next steps as we rebuild, and it's going to be hard for a while, but as we rebuild, we really have to prioritize creating cultural foundations that support people, right? Because if they've been removed from the industry and are thriving and starting to get sober, you know, reaching out to therapists. My therapist friends are so busy right now. It's crazy. Like their workload is so great because so many people are reaching out, you know, but when the bars start reopening and the restaurants start reopening, I don't want people just to go back into an environment that's going to harm them again, you know? So we need to be very cognizant and thoughtful of that too.
So if we were reaching out, we keep getting this constant echo. Okay, so I just will open it up to the panelists because I think this idea of where do we go now, I think we've heard the term and we've seen a couple of questions posed about the industry and how do we create that shift of employees coming back into places and not feeling supported. I think we have to start small because Steve has done a phenomenal job of linking it all up and other folks. But I think how can we, if you had recommendations for the industry right now, if you had a magic wand and could say, hey, this is the first step, because obviously, Steve, you're so far down the road. Jeff, you've got a culture within your company. I mean, this isn't something that happened overnight. And then on top of coming out of a pandemic, that's a whole other set of challenges because resources are locked. In your all's opinion, how do you think this should progress, or what suggestions or tips could you recommend given these times?
Well, I think the first step is just having a dialogue. I think, listen, we do manager retreats, we do staff meetings. I mean, culture is a living, breathing thing, right? You always have culture, whether it's bad, whether it's good. And if you have good culture today, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have good culture 3 months from now. It's something that you have to be passionate about, you have to constantly work on. And I think just this dialogue of saying it's okay to not be okay. It's okay to ask for help. I mean, I think about Ben, the chef that committed suicide that we named after Ben's friends. Opening night of the restaurant, there were 4 sober chefs in the kitchen, but yet there was something within him that he felt like he couldn't ask for help. He couldn't turn to the guy next to him and say, I can't seem to get this thing. How are you getting this thing? And so I think it starts with conversations. I think it starts with the idea that making it really okay for people to need help. I mean, we go to great lengths if people need to take a leave of absence. We help people get into therapy. And that is a known fact in our company now. So, right. So, I mean, it's just an ongoing dialogue where there's always conversation. And this is across 22 restaurants where I have employees stop me and say, thank you so much for what you're doing. And it's not about getting thanks, but when they do that, what I know is our message is getting through to our employees. They know there's help. They know there's a system that will support them if they ask. And I think that is the first step, making it okay to not be okay and making that a very loud, explicit part of your daily communication. It's not implicit in our world, it's explicit. Everybody knows if you're struggling with mental health, we will help you.
So an intervention that I really like to teach about is one that centers around our ability and willingness to ask for help. So something that this industry is very, very good at is providing help, right? It's hospitality. So people are very good at, wanting to help and wanting to create an experience or whatever, right? But what we're not good at is asking for help. That's why we martyr ourselves during a shift and take on too much of a workload. We work too many shifts in the week and we burn ourselves out and all of these pieces. So I encourage people to practice asking for help and model asking for help. So start small, in the littlest things. Can you help me do this small task? Can you help me do this small task? And, encourage those around you to ask for help in small ways so that you're building and practicing asking for help, maybe when there's a situation that's a little bit more dire or uncomfortable. This creates increased psychological safety, increased vulnerability, to be able to have these conversations and destigmatize these conversations. And really, we're creating a system of community support that way too. That it's not just self-care, it's community care. We are all supporting each other because, we love each other a bunch. So we might as well, really be doing that. But creating a culture where asking for help, even with the smallest things, is something that you can start doing for free. And you can do it in your day-to-day, not just within the workspace.
Yeah, I really like what both Steve and Laura have had to say on this. I think definitely as a, I guess it's the same true for women, but for men, it's hard to ask for help. It's a hard thing to do. And, so what I found is, this recovery and being sober for me, it's about relationships. And so having, what I find that's really helpful is having a trusted, circle of friends, that I can talk to about anything. When I have, issues, going on, and then also finding other healthy, outlets, and places where I can do things with people that are, sober. And so, I've got a group that we do, yoga together, and other types of exercise, and I, participate in, 12-step stuff. And even for me, that's, got long-term sobriety, I found, I picked up the phone during COVID and called a therapist and had some sessions, right? Because, it was something I wanted to do before, but I couldn't find the right person in New Orleans. And so with all this mental health stuff going to like telehealth and Zoom or whatever, I was able to find the right person, and and I had a few sessions because there was a lot of days at the beginning with 2 kids at the house and homeschooling where I was like, and a drink was starting to look like a good idea, right? So there's a lot of things I do to take care of myself. I think it's really important that we promote and model those behaviors.
For sure. And something else I want to really drive home for people within the conversation around mental health is access to therapy, access to mental health care. And it is very inaccessible for a lot of people within our industry, people who are undocumented, specifically people who are maybe being paid off the books. There's a whole population within our industry that are often invisible and forgotten, who don't have access to care. Not even just to mention, the basic inaccessibility of mental health care and like physical health care resources within our industry as provided by the organizations that we look for. So advocating and, writing letters to your local representation within politics, state and federal, about access to universal health care, advocacy for people who are living here undocumented, like the human beings within our industry. Really important to do that kind of work alongside destigmatizing these issues, because we can just destigmatize all day, but if there's not a resource for people to go to and actually obtain that care, we need all the pieces of the puzzle together.
I think these are great. And Ashley asked a question a little bit ago about this idea of this celebrating things at work and not celebrating with alcohol. And I think it's unique to different industries, but I think I would look at other businesses and figure out ways to celebrate victories and employee things that work out well, pre and post shift, different ways to celebrate rather than using alcohol. Especially, and I think Steve shared, that they've kind of gotten out of that culture, and it's a culture shift. So I think it's just search to other industries, because in most of our other workplaces, we're not celebrating in the middle of the day with a shot or at the end of the workday before we drive out. I think it's a culture thing that's become embedded in the culture, and I think as we shift out, I think it's looking to other industries and seeing that. Just because it's available doesn't mean it's the right thing to do to celebrate, because as we're hearing, we're actually alienating some of our professional colleagues in the process that may be in recovery or can't celebrate in this. And then there's the stigma. Why didn't you come to this party? Why didn't you do this? So it creates an unhealthy work environment and unhealthy relationships. The one thing that I did want to share, because we're almost done here, is we've developed at the school, let's see if I can share my screen, and this is for anyone. Let's see if this works. It's not, here we go. Let's see if this shares this window. Nope, it's sharing us, but that's okay. So I put it in the chat window a few minutes ago. And so just pretend you're looking at a really cool website right now. The Tulane School of Social Work launched a self-care resources page. And again, like anything, if you type in self-care into Google, you get a gazillion things. It's actually anxiety provoking, because what do you click on? Where do you go? So this website was designed during COVID, but also to support everyone. Within 1 to 2 clicks, you can be practicing self-care, whether it's mindfulness, whether it's meditation. If that's not your thing, we have an indulge section where you can go on and see the latest concerts that are online. You can go explore virtual museums. There's resources for families to engage, everything in self-care to be able to support. There are links to 2 national crisis lines in case someone were to come onto the webpage and be in crisis. There's links out, but it's generally an idea to foster that mental health and mental wellness and practice self-care, and to really have that become part of our workday and what we do, and taking breaks to shift. And I think if you go on there, you're going to learn a little bit about self-care. And I will tell you, if you're on Facebook or social media and you've seen people during the pandemic, they're building, structures in their backyard. They're doing this. That's not really self-care. That's work. Self-care is really taking time. I had to check off of social media for a while because I kept thinking, I'm not doing enough in my supposed spare time. But it really wasn't self-care. So I think it's an intentional thing that helps nurture your mental, your physical, a spirit and how you're going through. So please take a look at that. I want to thank Steve. I want to thank Jeff. I want to thank Laura for really coming out and being champions of this work. This isn't something that we talk about often, especially in an industry. But I think each one of you have shown how you can be successful, why you can be successful, and the importance of a healthy workforce. At the end of the day, we love the hospitality industry. It's what we do as a culture. We go out and celebrate, and it's going to be a post-COVID world where we're going to find out how to celebrate. We're going to be back in these settings, and having a workforce that is healthy, that's doing the professional jobs, that makes our dining out and going to bars and restaurants that experience. I think you all have set some great examples, and I'm thankful to each and every one of you for being here, able to join me on the panel. And we will be following up this work. Laura and I have talked about launching. She has a survey out, and we're talking about partnering on another survey to really look at with some academic data on the issues and then finding ways forward. So more to come on that. So I wanted to thank all the audience for being out there. All our contact information's listed. Yes, absolutely. Thank you, our audience, for coming out. And the more we can do to reduce stigma, it's each and every one of ours role towards that healthier workforce that I think Steve, Jeff, and Laura have all described. And it's the workforce that I believe the industry wants. So you all have a great afternoon or evening wherever you are in the world. Take care.